served. By now, we would have begun to digest and properly discuss key takeaways from the first panel discussion, which we hope and would have served to be a meaningful catalyst to this session entitled, How to Make Private Equity Happen in Trinidad and Tobago. As we are aware, the role of the capital market is key as a contributor to the sustainability and growth of the economy. Private equity, sometimes called patient capital, very patient, facilitates investment in entities lending to the fostering of innovation, entrepreneurship, and wider economic growth and diversification. Thus, its importance as a component of investment portfolios, and I would like to emphasize portfolios. Where does that entity get that much needed capital to take it to the next level? Is debt the only option leading to the over-leveraged hazard? We tell our youth, be innovative, be entrepreneurs. How do we fund their dreams? Most conversations tend to speak to risk as the first thought when speaking to private equity. Hence the reason I speak to a portfolio approach. So the question to ask is, how does this fit into the relevant investment goal as part of a portfolio balancing of product, concentration, risk, and return? How do we make ready the relevant entities? Educate and inform, and I again emphasize educate and inform, both the investor and potential issuers, and ensure standards are set to inform the quality and sustainability of the proposed investment. Is there a path to IPO? How do we create and make this market? Can we create further diversification in a portfolio by investing along varied entities' life cycle? As discussed in session 1, it is clear that the private equity concept is the missing enabler of our domestic capital, and we simply cannot afford to allow any more opportunities to bring it to life to escape us, as it represents the key to unlocking the next generation of innovation and stock market listings, both junior and senior stock exchange. As the president of Securities Dealers Association of Trinidad and Tobago, I'm delighted to be the moderator of this session, as we at ESDAT feel duty-bound to be part of this long-needed discussion, and I take this opportunity to acknowledge and in advance thank my fellow members present today, whom I am confident will, as usual, rise to the occasion to lead the off-camera work required for such fundamental initiatives. At this point, let me applaud Aspire for bringing this conversation forward and bringing the market together to treat with what is our business as a market actor. By the end of this conversation, we are optimistic that individually and collectively, we would have arrived at a shared philosophy, which in turn would drive us to draft a framework that the industry participants would develop, own, and use as an industry standard to obtain the necessary approvals to use to participate in proposed private equity funds, such as the Aspire funds, who has been the proud sponsor of this event. So we would like this conversation to move to action. The why was answered in the previous discourse. So let's get down to the real conversation about how do we move from the identified need to creating the right environment to make it happen. I now take this opportunity to introduce my esteemed panel. Bert, as he's fondly called, is the Chief Executive Officer of Small Enterprise Assistance Funds, co-founded SEAF in 1989, a not-for-profit 501c3 organization, which at the same time is a SEC-registered investment advisor. SEAF is dedicated to improving the lives of people in undeserved communities through investing in and partnering with local entrepreneurs. Mr. Burt has led the growth of SEAF to more than $1.2 billion in total capital across 39 investment funds, having invested in more than 440 companies and more than 360 exits. And I called him Burt or Mr. Burt because his esteemed surname has my tongue tied. So please, I asked his permission prior. We have Mr. Ron Carter to his left, Chief Executive Officer of GMMB Bank Limited, a private equity advocate. Ronald is a career financial services and investment management professional whose experience spans 30 years across the Caribbean and the United States. He has held several senior positions within several top-tier global financial institutions and successfully led businesses in wealth and investment management, capital markets, and corporate banking. Mr. Nigel Edwards. Appointed Executive Director of the Trinidad and Tobago Unit Trust Corporation on June 1st, 2018, his previous position was CFO of the UTC and was instrumental in the corporation maintaining its robust financial position and ensuring it is well positioned to optimize opportunities. He's also served as CEO and Executive Director in other investment groups. And then we have Mr. Leslie Clark. Managing Director, Murphy Clark Financial Limited. He has held senior positions within the financial sector, including Scotia Trust and Merchant Bank, RBTT, and Sagicor Merchant. Through asset allocation models and active portfolio management, he was able to successfully navigate his client base through the recent financial storms. He has worked on various pension and segregated plans, including multinationals, investment committees, and NGOs. Thank you, gentlemen. Let's now start this interesting conversation. Private equity is nothing new in the developed markets, and as discussed in the Why It Hasn't Happened session, we saw how our Jamaican compatriots have gotten it right thus far. What have they done and what can we learn from them? What do we need to do? In other words, what do we pick up from what they've done that we can actively action and move forward with in this region, this country?
Who wants to start? I guess I can start. So perhaps the first thing that they've done is they've actually done it. And I think that's where our starting point should be. It's time that we collectively put our money where our mouth is, and that's a requirement. Secondly, though, I just want to slightly redirect the focus of the question, because I understand why you would want to focus on Jamaica as a template. But I think the challenge that we have, one of the biggest challenges that we have in territories such as this is scale and getting to scale. Getting to scale either as a company that's looking for markets or even getting to scale as a private equity firm looking to place investments. And I think one of the challenges that we have is to start thinking about and looking at private equity and investment on a much wider scale, not whether it's local Trinidad and Tobago, local Jamaica, but at a minimum to start thinking more regionally and to embrace a regional approach to how we place our investments and how we view investing in private equity.
I think I agree. I think that, I look at it from two sides. In terms of private equity, there's what I would call the demand side, which is the investors, right? You need investors and you need willing investors. And then there's the supply, which is issuing companies. And on the issuing side, I think one of the things, and again, you'd mentioned the Jamaica market, is starting on the macro side. So I think one of the things that we can learn is from what Jamaica has done on the macroeconomic side, a real vision around transformation, macroeconomic transformation, which starts with articulating what the vision is and sharing, getting buy-in. So going around not just building what a long-term plan is, but really being deliberate around engaging people around what's that vision, how do we get there? Then breaking that vision down into actionable items. And I think that, again, we have visions, but have we broken that down into deliberate quarterly action items that we need to take to get to that plan? And then the monitoring. Because again, so that discipline that we apply in our corporate world around how do we achieve long-term goals, I think is something that we can better do from a macroeconomic perspective. Improving ease of business, of course, is also key towards bringing out the entrepreneurs, getting entrepreneurs to come to the forefront such they're actually finding it easier to do business, and hence that impetus to further grow, and which capital essentially feeds into.
For something as mundane as private equity to fill a room, you all have done very well. I'm a little bit on the more radical side. I really believe, I hear you, Ron, I don't believe that we can emulate anyone. I think what we need to do is act. We can't sing dancehall music. We do not support our young athletes when they're running track and field, whereas in Jamaica, it's 15,000 plus people at the stadium. So the individual who is at the Olympics to go against Bolt is at a much severe disadvantage. So what we need to do is to believe in ourselves first. I think that is where it starts. And then, only then it will happen. From a financial perspective, what does that mean? With the belief and confidence, we will be able to create that liquidity. Because I don't want to rehash a lot of the points that were made in the prior panel. But institutions worry about coming out. And Sana made mention of quiet placement of funds. Well, it needs to be a little less quiet. Maria spoke about trust, investing personally and in small companies. I think I have some member of staff. Give Maria a card, please, so we can. And we will follow with you later. But at the same time, from a financial perspective, we are in a generation of individuals who have lost trust. And if they want to touch and feel the investment because they do not trust, those takeovers, those land developments, the short 3-year to 7-year investments need to make sense, and they need to be able to hold it. If that doesn't happen, they're not going to trust you into the longer term private equity deals that go into 7 to 9 years, 10 to 12 years, and so on.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the panelists that getting it done is the first step. On the other hand, I know, and we've been looking at the region since 2007, in the heyday when the oil prices were high, et cetera, Trinidad was very much leading the way. I think to some extent, boosted by very high profits. There was, I could even say, a little bit of a rush, and we all know there's been 1 or 2 private equity funds 10, 15 years ago that did not do so well. I think you have to prepare things well. That trust from the investors has to be there. Trust from the entrepreneurs has to be there. The entrepreneurs are looking for value. When they are going to sell part of their company, they have to see that there's something beyond money that they're going to get for that, particularly when banks, to be quite honest, have been too easy lending. Change is never easy. When people say, you said patient capital, private equity is patient capital. We're not patient in terms of change. What private capital is allowing is companies to move from where they are to where they need to be, whether that's governance, whether that's to take advantage of the new technologies that are there, or the needs to transform the economy, their business for the new world. So I think that, you know, the other thing I really want to say before maybe concluding is I'm from the Netherlands myself. You can see my funny name. You did a good job. And I think we had Dutch disease. I don't know, this is one of the things that since Rembrandt we're maybe best known for. We had a natural gas boom in the 70s, and it distorted the economy utterly. In a sense, it's a blessing and a curse. I think Trinidad has had an even bigger blessing and arguably even a bigger curse, because the oil that you have here is massive, and it's still there. I think in many senses, it's good that you went through the shock. And now it's stabilized at a level. I think there's been some good actions taken here. But I think that amount of natural resources stops diversification, it leads to an easier life. And let's face it, at the end of the day, all people would rather have an easier life than a harder life. So I think what we have to do now, and I think where Jamaica has come through, Jamaica's come through a crisis. They have not wasted that crisis. And I think what they've done is they've set up an exchange. I think they've channeled the decline in the availability of fixed income instruments into something that has a little bit more liquidity because enough people came in. We'll see whether it's an asset bubble forming, et cetera. There's I think, very responsible voices and investors in Jamaica who are concerned about that and who want a more regional approach. And that's really the final issue, I think, what we have to do. I think Jamaica has a 5% bucket for Jamaica only, but they have a 5% other bucket for investing more globally. And I think there's a lot of interest in the region. I think Trinidad needs to assume its position, at least of co-leadership in this field. I think we have got very sophisticated financial institutions here with a long-term franchise, but they need to change that franchise. We're benefited by a couple of them. We certainly also think Aspire on the innovation side, because I think we have to say private equity is a long let's say, ladder. There's private equity that's close to growth expansion, and there's private equity for buyout, and there's venture capital for innovation. Frankly, this economy needs all of that. Innovation against the brain drain, and we're very happy to work with Kerwin and with Aspire to come with an innovation fund. And then a private equity fund for expansion, for making some change, partial buyout. And we have been really benefited by two very strong investors in this community. We'll make an announcement near the, I think the 23rd of October, we'll launch the first closing of that fund. I think, so what does Trinidad need to do? It does need to do something. It needs to understand that equity is an important part of any functioning economy. You can't do it by debt alone. It needs to take some risk, allocate that risk, but allocate that risk carefully. And so we're registered with the TTSEC, we're registered with the USECC. We've done 30 years of investment. The investors that we are working with here, I think, recognize that there's a risk and they want to go with someone who's had that experience in there. Banking is not the same as private equity. And then finally, I think Trinidad, all of you need to try to push to change, to harder work. It's harder work from entrepreneurs, it's harder work from regulators, it's harder work from ultimately the financial institutions. But I think without that hard work, we're going to miss another great opportunity, and this country has missed it before.
Well, Bert, what you said is quite relevant, and it ties right back into actually what Oli Panon has said, speaking from a macroeconomic position, understanding that it is something that drives our economy. Making it our own, right? It's also very, very important. So we're not going to map to the Jamaica we built. It's nice to build it from, but we are unique. Let's see how we do it, because we have different cultural issues. Jamaicans are very much into entrepreneurship. This is something that we are now teaching in the schools, etc., and trying to bring it forward.
Well,
So
if I may interject, Bert spoke about Dutch disease. I think we're still suffering from the effects of Dutch disease. We have a generation, and I was sharing with Howard that it's really his generation, have aspired to working with banks and so on. But since the 1800s, our cooperative credit union league members, the TBLA this year celebrated 125 years. We've had citrus growers, cocoa growers, a number of associations with ownership that Remy spoke about. And with the petrodollars, we ended up losing that desire to innovate. Everybody wanted to just have a job and de-risk, as it were. So we became more landlords and traders as opposed to innovators. And with private equity, I think we really need to get back into a little bit of stress might actually work for us in that regard.
You know, I think that we are very much suffering from Dutch disease, and we see it in our risk aversion. I mean, from an investor perspective, I mean, when you look at our history, you know, back in the 80s, we would have just migrated from, you know, fixed deposits into moving into money market accounts and what we call money market accounts. And money market accounts, even then, essentially had a backstop to them. We are seeing that, I mean, I think from an investing perspective, we have a population, we understand real estate. But at the end of the day, how do we grow wealth? We grow wealth in our traditional asset, among traditional asset classes with equity and real estate. On the equity side, I think there's a tremendous need for continued education. And we do have a number of institutions, both private and public, that are doing work around investor education. And that has to ramp up, that has to continue. Getting into the schools where, again, the understanding of risk, the understanding of portfolio allocation, that it's about, you know, equity is fine as long as you allocate the right amount of personal capital to it in relation to your portfolio. So I think the education is very, very critical in there, because we do have a long way to go just in terms of being able to accept risk and to understand risk and to take risk and to understand that it is important in our portfolio, that if we have a portfolio with no risk, then we're not ultimately generating wealth for ourselves.
So how do we get that education out as an action item? How do we get it out? How do we get that message out? We have Central Bank has education. Your TTSEC has been in quite a bit with that. iPad, everybody has something to do. But how do we get that education and say, okay, this is what private equity is. This is how it ties into the macroeconomic side of things. How do we make it, and back to your point of making it ours, how do we get that out to the investors, and how do we get it out to the issuers in the sense of, okay, what you need to have, what you need to bring to the table, and how we can assist in that way to get it together. How do we do that education part?
I think success breeds success. And maybe I can get to that question by sharing with you our own experience. We have arguably the largest equity-based balanced fund in the country, certainly, and probably in the region. Maybe about 3 years ago, we set aside 5% of that fund for investment in private equity. And, so 5% of that, but guess what? Over the last 3 years, we've had those investments in private equity have primarily gone outside of Trinidad and Tobago, not because of a lack of willingness to look at opportunities in Trinidad and Tobago, but a lack of availability. We were actually very keen to invest in the first of the SME listed entities that came here, no matter what the actual equity was, we were keen to invest in it just by principle, because we feel it's important that people understand the importance of having entities like that to battle the issue of the Dutch disease, which is very much a reality. The challenge that we continue to have is that the environment, we've spoken a lot about culture, we've spoken a lot about the fact that this is a debt-driven economy. The challenge that we have is now at the level of educating. It's not primarily at the level of educating as you spoke about, the central bank and so on, but it's actually educating the entrepreneurs about the fact, the reality that there are other modalities to getting here. And there are benefits to private equity. Private equity actually is patient capital. But beyond that, private equity and what we've tried to do with the things that we've invested in is to lend support to the infrastructure, to the governance. And those are some of the things that we feel benefit these entities far greater than just giving them a check. And I think it's those issues that will really be game changers to the way that private equity is set up.
Yeah, just to add to that, and I think that's absolutely true, and we're very, very grateful for UTC's leadership in this field more generally. But I think at the end of the day, what educates the market best is success. So backing a couple of companies, showing that if they are changing their governance, showing that they are transparent, getting good audits, showing that they're hitting the opportunities. We're looking at Guyana. There's a lot of Trinidadian companies that actually are very relevant for Guyana. There are things in the region which I think Trinidad has had more leadership than people may realize, because I think people here tend to get down a little bit on themselves. But I think that leveraging a good company, showing a good company that is willing to bring a third-party investor aboard, having an independent director on, and then working hard in that. We had a little example of that. We were the first general private equity fund in Colombia right after the disturbances there, and Uribe was there, and after a modicum of peace was set up in 2005. The first fund was $20 million. There were big pension funds. They would put $1 million, $2 million, just to see what was going on. And I think that fund did very well. And as a result, within the next 10 years, $3 billion of additional capital came, lots of more fund managers came. Because people want to see, what is this you're talking about? Is this an academic thing? Is this something for people in Silicon Valley? I think what people want to see, no, this is what it means. They want to see a concrete analysis. If there is a transportation or logistics company here who is able to then improve its efficiency, reduce the cost, if there's a chain of clinics which are able to provide new technology in or design work, if there's a way to reach other markets, we're very, very mindful that these are small markets, but we know that there is a common heritage in terms of the law, certainly a high degree of education, a high degree of sophistication. We'd like to bring more from the region back from New York or from London, but they need to have the opportunities. So I think a couple of investments, not spray and pray, but effectively structured investments, because we need to regain the trust and we need to show the other entrepreneurs the benefits of hard work. And I think that's going to require some discipline. It doesn't happen overnight, but I'm very proud to say that where we are, where Trinidad is, we're launching the fund here at the end of October. The first close is about $50 million. And then working with Aspire on the innovation side, we're going to get it's going to be careful, one or two good companies, and then the word of mouth comes. Everything that we've done in 30 countries now is the first two deals are extremely important because everybody is looking at those deals. That's what it is. They don't know otherwise what it is. So that first one or two deals is critical, the support network, and as you were indicating, then coaching, educating the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur needs more than just a check. The entrepreneur really needs someone who's partnering with them, who's been there before, not going to do exactly what the entrepreneur is doing, but supporting them, whether it's on control, whether on marketing, whether incentives, whether all sorts of things which the entrepreneur typically hasn't been able to develop because he's so busy running. So I think we look very much forward to it. The macro side, I wouldn't wish a crisis on Trinidad. I mean, I think we've gotten close enough to it 2 years ago. I think what you've done with Petrotrin, I think, is necessary to get that out of the system. So I think this is as good a time as we're going to get for a while. We just need to make it succeed.
So is it a chicken and egg situation? Because you need investors to be able to then foster the investment in issuers. So is it a chicken and egg situation? Is it that the fund has to take that first risk, but then again, you still need the investors in? So then, is it then that you work with the product first, which are the issuers, to say, okay, fine, this is what you're trying to get. Is it then that you then have investments along the cycle? So there'll be those who just looking to expand, and yes, they need some help with respect to the governance, etc. And there'll be those who starting afresh, may have made some mistakes, but you need investments there likewise. How do you work this portfolio so that you get the product such that it's attractive, and then you also get the investors to be able to see it? Because remember, we are now commencing this stretch.
Yeah.
So history is not there. Right. And the mindset, there's a change of culture of that looking for a return. Most people don't even look at the risk. It's like bleach. You know, Clorox is bleach. So we say, okay, fine, it's UTC or it's a mutual fund, so we fine. Don't even look behind it. How do we get people to understand that this is the economy you're investing, this is how you build it, this is how you become responsible for the diversification of it, and how we get responsibility on both sides? Is it a chicken and egg situation?
Can just, once you pile on, because I think absolutely on the private equity side, it isn't just bleach. There's light bleach, high bleach, et cetera. I think the discipline, I think this is communication. At the end of the day, the investors want to know what their money is doing. They have an obligation to know what that is. The fund manager or the corporate finance people who are involved in the private equity side, they need to be able to, in a sense, bridge the gap between what the entrepreneur wants, needs, and what the investors have a right to expect. So there's an education process going all around. I think what's important is to divide the market up a little bit where the risks are very different. Innovation venture capital is very different from private equity, just like real estate finance is very different from working capital finance. And so I think one of the things that we need to do is to be very clear. That education, it has been a game. It's been a 2-year game, and it's chicken and egg because, well, this one will go depending on that, but this one will go depending on that. And what I have to say is that that's complicated, that's frustrating, but with the help of certainly the TTSEC has been listening, has been responsive. We've had good advice here, we've had good investors here. I think the same is in Jamaica, and we were using Jamaica and Trinidad at the same time because there is a natural leadership, bipolar is the wrong word, let's say two poles of leadership in the region. So we're very, very happy at that. But after 2 years, we're ready to launch. I know there are other people coming as well. The other people are seeing the same opportunity, and they should. There should be competition for what we do. But what's going to be critical is that we continue that education, continue transparent information, so that people are not saying, okay, that means I cannot do anything for 7 years until my dividend check comes in. No, no, no. There needs to be, and in fact, some of the product I think we're talking about, the bigger private equity product, we are going to move to get at least some dividends. It won't be, just so that people will see, yes, there is something happening. This is an expectation of return, and the entrepreneur has to realize that these investors, this is not putting a nice painting on the wall. These investors expect you to change, and they expect returns. So that's a dynamic conversation. It's transparency. It's regular reporting. It's making sure that the regulators see what you're doing, and it's making sure that the best entrepreneurs benefit from that private equity in a way that other entrepreneurs will want to say, I want some of that as well.
I think you've described it aptly as a chicken and egg situation, and I think that's okay, because I think part of the challenge is recognizing where you are on the maturity spectrum. And so one of the traps is to think that you can jump to being ultra mature from being an infant. And I think it's okay for us to go through infancy and mature. And we've been on that process. And I can't stress enough the fact that that process starts by making decisions. I think somebody in the last panel spoke about the decision makers and policy drivers are in this room. And I think that's spot on. The people in this room have the ability. Nigel Romano mentioned that if banks were serious about private equity, that there's a structural issue because a bank is not set up for private equity within the bank, but they have the wherewithal to create the structures that allow that to happen. And I think the advocacy now needs to shift to that. It now needs to shift to finding the people who have not just an ability to do it, but to get them to the point where there's a willingness to do it, and that takes time. And we've been very patient, but we also convinced that that's the mechanism through which the economy can and will be transformed. So for us, it's an issue of corporate responsibility to do it. And putting money into private equity is not just about a return, but we're actually investing, essentially expensing in educating people in finding and discovering opportunities, because we see that as part of our responsibility. And I think that's the key to get the people in this room to the point where they're actually willing to get something out of the pocket and into developing the market.
I agree in terms of the education. It is an important component. In terms of there's a number of, it really takes a lot of participation. A lot of young people can participate. They participate on the stock market. I have an 11-year-old who is trading on eToro and killing it right now. And he's actually going to be presenting to the board of a bank because it shows that we don't have, the information is out there to a number of the young people. So it gladdens my heart to hear that, that Unitrust has 5% allocated to this in terms of private equity. But it's easier for me to strip down, and once upon a time you would have to put in 100,000 US as the minimum requirement in a US bond. But now you can get a private equity through Carlyle, KKR, or Blackstone at 100,000, and I could strip that down to $500 and participate with a little kid in Cumana or Rampanalgas, and they are participating. So to participate locally, maybe some piece of the CLICO assets needs to be stripped down into a little fund of funds, and people understand how they get to participate, how this thing works. That is the best education.
Yeah. Well, we spend quite a bit of time in education because it's quite important. Because at the end of the day, it comes back to what you don't know creates fear. So I think we're down to 11 minutes now. We need to get to questions, but there are things we still need to, as an audience, maybe you could treat with it. How do we make the market in the sense of where's the exit and the understanding of that? It comes back again to education. Everything seems to come back to understanding that part of it and understanding where the private equity and venture capital marries, in addition to which us getting a very clear understanding that stop beating up on the banks so much. There's the capital markets generally. There's a part which a company could go through that the investing public gets accustomed, gets comfortable with them. Cinema One is a very good example of that, and applause to them to being the first listed on the Junior Stock Exchange. Right? But those are the questions we need to answer. But at this juncture, let's take some questions, and maybe somebody will ask those questions so we can get it done.
Morning again. We speak about innovation, and there's a level of risk when we innovate. So obviously, we would now need to evaluate the level of risk. Some of the more contemporary organizations reward innovation by providing incentives to the employees for being innovative, coming up with new ideas, new products, and whatnot. However, the culture in Trinidad and Tobago in particular is that we beat down on individuals or groups that come up with ideas that is outside of the traditional ideas that fail. And we always speak about the failures, and we pay less attention to the successes. Now, we know based on the information that we have that more than 85% of most small businesses or entrepreneurs fail within the first 3 years because of lack of capital. And we understand that. My question is, do we have as institutions, as part of our budget, a percentage of our budget that we allocate towards research and development? And when we would have provided that research and we have arrived at our situation where we have the information, how many of us spend time in communicating the results of our R&D to our customers, our clients, and to the wider public?
You do R&D?
So we don't do R&D in that way, but I will say that we have, we recognize the importance of evolving the business. I'll just quickly summarize. We have something that we refer to as an innovation unit that is intended to constantly be turning over, finding new ideas, finding new things, and that could be, and those ideas could be from the very simple, that let's do a self-defense class for women in our organization, for instance, all the way up to transforming the way we view and look at distribution. And so it can be very simple to very complex and enterprise-wide. I think the way I view this, I was really encouraged by, and that program comes out of, the Genesis is something that we've seen. I was invited to one time to a celebratory event right in this hall actually, and that particular company, a large energy-based company in Trinidad, had this award ceremony, and they went through, you know, I think it was maybe 15 people who presented different projects, and each one, so they had different categories, I think 5 categories, the top 3, and each one was some idea that was either generating revenue, saving expenses, improving health and safety, and so of course in each one they were celebrating the success of those things, and they were giving out one major award, and I looked at the way the thing was structured, and I was adding up. I stopped adding when the company got about $20 million in either savings or expense savings or revenue generation. I kind of stopped adding up because creating the culture of innovation within the company was not just, you weren't just getting the one thing that you were giving the prize for, but it was generating this mass of value. And so that drives an innovation thrust for us that is now feeding, that's a feedstock for ideas. And we're not the only one. I mean, I've seen other companies do similar things. So I think Bert started before. There's a lot of stuff that happens that perhaps we're not even aware of the degree to which these things are happening. And maybe that's part of the education, back to the education issue. Part of what we need to be getting out there more and more is how are companies actualizing innovation? Because yeah, it's great to have companies that are innovative and companies that come to you with great ideas, but you want to have within your firm a company, in our case, a company that's 37 years old. You want to have the bright 23, 25-year-old who comes up with the next great idea for the next phase of development of the company. And so I think you have to create the wherewithal for that to happen.
Maybe just a quick thing. I think it's a great issue, innovation, because you don't want some very smart people to work 3 days, 3 years, while across the world 3 or 4 other people are solving the problem ahead of them. One of that's a different kind of education. The internet is a help, but I know what we've set up and what we're also going to be doing here, I think in the beginning of January, a Center for Entrepreneurship and Executive Development. This connects entrepreneurs all over the world with developments in particular areas so that they can learn. If they think is innovative, let's say it's an electronic payment platform, what are other electronic payment platforms doing? If they got something that's new, or is it actually inferior to what's going on? This is a central issue because you want to channel smart people, but you don't want them to put the ladder up on the wrong wall. So I think with the not only our funds in 30 countries, but I think with a network of experts, that should be available to all entrepreneurs who are interested in innovation. And that, I know there's been a good software conference, I think, recently done by Republic Bank and AmCham, I think, which was a very big success here. Part of that success is that the entrepreneurs themselves come together and start to talk to each other and say, this, you know, what I'm doing. They're not sharing everything, but they're understanding where people are doing, and people are by nature a little competitive. I think that kind of sharing, providing a base, that's why Silicon Valley is so successful, because people know what each other are doing. If you're by yourself, you don't know. So we have to connect Trinidadian or Trinbagonian entrepreneurs with each other, with the region, and then ultimately the world. I think we're on the way, and there's a number of institutions in Trinidad who realize that. Final example, that really has to come from the private sector. We really need business associations. We really need linking up with universities. I know there's the West Indies has a lot of interest in the health technology. So managing that and getting an ecosystem together is the best way both to encourage innovation as well as to, I hope, diminish the amount of unnecessary loss from not understanding that what you're doing is in fact not as good as someone else is doing. It's a central issue for all innovation and investments. We have to try to track what the world is because we can't back something that is already obsolete as it is. No?
And I think that, I mean, the innovation is critical. I think the other part is the support. So I have a great idea. How do I take it to the next level? And we certainly see that in Trinidad. We've got lots of smart people. We've got lots of bright ideas. One of the areas that we see, and again, there are pockets of institutions helping. And I think what we have to get better at is communication about the ecosystem. And I think that forums such as today are very good in that, because you find that there are things happening that can be potential support of, yeah, I have a great idea, but you know what, I don't understand what it takes to take something to market. I don't understand the capital structure. I don't understand. I think that the bank is a panacea for my financing requirement. I don't understand, well, I'm not at that point in terms of the growth of my business, that bank financing isn't, forget available, it's not what I want. So I think connecting getting the word out there on the various parts of the ecosystem, because there are stuff happening. And I think, I mean, just to say that, you know, we do have a tremendous way to go, but there are things happening. And I think I wouldn't want us to leave to say, well, there's nothing happening. As Nigel mentioned, you know, you've allocated funds towards private equity. I mean, we have launched a private equity fund very recently with a Caribbean focus, which includes Trinidad and Tobago. So there are things happening, but it's, you know, like I said, connecting ecosystem.
Yeah, just to be clear, you know, the first session and the second section, people talking about venture capital and they're talking about private equity and they're talking about bank debt in the same, this is the same thing and the analysis thereof. When people put in venture capital or private equity, what they're looking for is not a cash flow. What they're looking for is a return, and it's not necessarily the same thing. Because if you're expecting your dividends to be the return, then that is nothing. Because a dividend yield is normally in the vicinity of about 3 to 5%. That's not what people are looking for. People are looking for, when you put in your venture capital, they're looking for a return of 18, 20%, that sort of stuff. And that return will come when you sell your share. Yeah, that's where it will come. So when the first panel was talking about an exit, that is what they're looking for. So if we have the stock exchange now with the junior listing, that is an exit. And that's where you'll get your money. Or you sell it to somebody who can understand the value of what they're buying. Yeah? So there's a clear definition between that and the bank debt. I just want to put that on the table.
Education is, I take it, I'm not an insider, I'm an investor. I take education to be as broad as possible. And it also applies to all the insiders. I think what I have not heard today, I've heard about confidence, trust, credibility, but I didn't hear about personal integrity. And it's not meant as a criticism, or it's a critique that the members on the dais, the speakers, should really reference integrity in getting from the why to the how. Without that, there wouldn't be trust. And trust is the biggest element in investment.
I mean, absolutely. Integrity, I think, is inherent in trust. You won't trust someone who isn't consistent personality, who hasn't got good character, who doesn't treat the employees correctly, who is behind his payments. All that is part of due diligence. It is, I think, if you look at private equity, it's not a transaction, it's a marriage. And that means you have to really get to know the entrepreneur that you're backing. I think the entrepreneur needs to know who you are. I think the trust goes on both sides. If you're going to provide someone with governance rights, with an expectation, you want to see what that person is. So your point is very accurate. I'm sorry that we didn't dwell on it. It's part of but I think it's a basic building block in trust amongst the entire ecosystem.
Yeah. Let me also point out that...
But which, by the way, I would say one thing about the Caribbean is everybody knows everybody. I mean, if you go to New York or India, you know, there are a lot of people who are sharks because one transaction, it's okay, there's a billion other people. In the Caribbean, I'm amazed at how deep the knowledge is. Oh, wait a minute, his father's father did something, you know, and in some senses, it's a very positive thing about the community here. Another level, it can sometimes be a dead weight on the kids of the fathers who may have done something not quite right.
Exactly. That is part of integrity, equality of treatment, equal opportunity. So I think it's an element that the Aspire and the folks who hosted, thank you by the way, it's been an education, could take forward to the next presentation.
Thank you very much. A round of applause for the second panel.